Welcome back for the third and final video in this series. In this video, we'll take a brief look at just a few bonus topics which haven't already been covered. And the number one topic which I've been putting off for too long is a Wanderer death. The first thing to know is that death is treated quite differently depending on whether you're playing the Wanderer stage or the finale. If your Wanderer dies during the Wanderer stage, they usually get to respawn at the start of the next round. Although it will also introduce a horrific malformation to the board. We'll have a look at all that shortly. In contrast, dying during the finale stage tends to be a lot more, well, fatal. The storybook may provide additional rules for the finale, but in general you only get one life, so use it wisely. If the central Wanderer dies, the game will end with a conclusion in the storybook. And if some other Wanderer dies, then they're out of the game, and the surviving Wanderers will have to struggle on as best they can. In summary, the finale may be pretty unforgiving, but at least it's straightforward. If you die, you're dead. In contrast, death during the Wanderer stage is a bit more involved, so let's look at a gameplay example. We're a few rounds into the game, and the patient aftershock terror has just attacked Emily and inflicted 3 points of red damage. There are many ways to mitigate damage, such as defense tests or discarding existence tokens, but in this case nothing could be done, and Emily takes all 3 points of damage. Her maximum health is 9, but she's already suffered 6 points of damage, so the attack reduces her health to 0, killing her. If all Wanderers are dead at the same time, then it's game over. In this case, Linus is still alive, so the game doesn't end. Instead, we turn to page 20 in the rulebook and follow these step-by-step instructions. First, we tip Emily over, and she's out of the game for the rest of the round. None of her cards or components can be used, and she's not even considered a Wanderer anymore. Next, she receives a Withered Condition card. That reduces her maximum health by 1. This is Emily's first Withered card, but if she ever receives a fourth, it's immediately game over. Next, we set her health to exactly 0 by discarding any excess damage tokens. Because of the Withered card, her maximum health is now 8, so we'll discard down to 8 points of damage. Now we spawn a Malformation. This is Emily's first Withered card, so we spawn her first Malformation, entitled Onset of Darkness. I'll place the standee, or miniature, on the world shard where Emily died. And the Malformation also inherits Emily's remaining mental capacity, in this case 4. In general, dying near the start of a round is especially bad news, because it gives the Malformation lots of mental capacity to spend on their rampage. And of course, Emily's mental capacity gets reduced to 0, on account of being dead. By the way, this Malformation has a maximum mental capacity of 6, whereas Emily's maximum is 7. And since no one can exceed their maximum mental capacity, there could be rare situations where a Malformation doesn't inherit all of a Wanderer's current mental capacity. Though if you find yourself in that situation, it's a pretty safe bet that your Wanderer is having a really bad day. I'll place the Malformation card beside all the other monster cards in play. In most regards, Malformations follow the same rules as Terrors, which means that as soon as it spawns, we populate it with Domain Rift tokens. Just like Terrors, Malformations manifest themselves into the otherworld by drawing on the essence of the world shard they spawned on. So we roll 3 sentience dice matching its world shard card, and place Domain Rift tokens on the card matching the result. This might also be a good time to look at the Malformation's passive ability, because that kicks in right away. This one says, flip Emily's existence cards Palliative Care and Soothing Murmurs to their backsides, and flip them back when Onset dies. I also noticed that its secondary ability, or Domain Rift ability, gets applied when there's at least one Skull Rift on its card. That ability makes it even more vicious, so I might want to consider attacking that rift if I want to weaken it. We're almost done, but there's one last step to perform. Be careful not to overlook this, because the rulebook doesn't remind you about it. If the Abomination is still on the board, then check the bottom left corner of its card, and apply the effect which triggers whenever a Wanderer dies. In this case, the Abomination gains 3 mental capacity, as if being killed wasn't bad enough already. And that's it. The rest of this round plays out in the usual way, except that Emily is temporarily out of the game. And now there's a deranged saw-wielding nurse roaming the map. Also, Linus had better be extra careful not to die. In this example, Emily was killed by a monster, but it's also possible to be killed during an encounter while reading the storybook. The rulebook covers this in detail, but in a nutshell, you won't be able to complete the encounter. Let's fast forward to the end of the round, so that everyone has reached the bottom of the mental capacity track. It's now the refresh phase, and once again, the rulebook will take you through it step by step. In the last video, we went through a refresh phase, but in this video, we get to respawn Emily. It would be nice if she just magically regained all her health, but this is not that kind of game. Instead, we get to roll sentience dice of every colour, based on her sentience attributes, and then count up the skulls. She gets to restore 1 point of health for each skull we roll, and 3 more points of health for good measure. In this case, I only rolled 1 skull, so I'll remove 4 damage tokens. Note that this dice roll isn't a sentience test, so you can't treat spheres as wild, and you can't use domains from your dashboard. What you roll is what you get. Finally, we'll roll the Otherworld die to see which world shard she respawns on. And can you believe it, she's right back in the eye of the tornado. And that's it for Wanderer Death. Now let's look at something a little less heavy. There are a lot of different tokens in this game, and although I've covered most of the general purpose tokens, there are a couple which I haven't covered yet. The first of these is the trapped token. If your Wanderer ever becomes trapped at a certain location, you place a trapped token next to their figure. Obviously they can't move out of that location until some game effect sets them free. Not even dying is enough to get out, because when they respawn at the start of the next round, they'll still be at the same location and they'll still be trapped. There are a few additional rules for trapped wanderers, but I won't go over them now because you don't need to memorize them. Just consult the trapped section of the rulebook when you need to. And finally, we have void tokens. The game may tell you to place one on a world shard, and it means that the location is a desolate void. Wanderers can't perform encounters, domain actions, or search actions from here. In contrast, monsters aren't affected by void tokens. And that's it for tokens. Obviously the rulebook can show you the name and appearance of every token in the game, and the index will help you find the relevant rules. The base game includes 2 family Lineage envelopes, 8 Lineage tokens, and 96 legacy cards. So let's take a look at how those work. All these components are dedicated to the abominations, and in a nutshell, they mean that each victory against an abomination will give you a couple of rewards, and each defeat will give you a couple of penalties. These rewards and penalties take the form of cards and tokens which carry over into later games. To help familiarise you with the various rules and components, I'm going to go through a pretty detailed example, but please keep in mind that you don't need to memorise any of this. The back of each abomination card has detailed instructions, and the setup instructions in the rulebook will remind you to set up a Lineage envelope at the start of each game. There's really just one thing you need to tattoo on the back of your hand, which is this. At the very end of every Wanderer stage, whether you win or lose, you must flip over the abomination card and apply either the top or bottom effect. Now that we've covered the single most important rule, let's dive into the example. We'll suppose that we've just finished the Wanderer stage and we didn't manage to defeat aggression, which is not unrealistic for our first game. We'll apply the bottom effect, which tells us to place the aggression token into its family Lineage envelope. There are 2 family envelopes in the core game, Rage and Masquerade, and Aggression is from the Rage family. In a moment we'll see how that token will affect future games, but right now there's another effect we need to apply. Each abomination comes with 12 legacy cards, which look like this. They contain a variety of effects which are beneficial to the Wanderers. For example, a Wanderer in possession of this card gets a +2 bonus on their maximum health. Wanderers will gain one of these cards each time they manage to defeat an abomination, and these cards carry over from one game to the next. But in our example, we didn't manage to defeat the abomination, and one of the penalties for our failure is that we lose any legacy cards associated with aggression. Because this is our first game, we don't yet have any such cards, so we don't need to do anything else. Continuing with our example, suppose that a few days have passed and we're ready to play our second game of Dawn of Madness. We can choose to face whichever abomination we like, so let's go with Fury. He's from the Rage family, so during game setup we must bring out the Rage envelope. We'll take any and all tokens from the envelope and place them on the matching quadrant of the envelope. In our case we have just one token, which goes on the aggression area at the top. And we must apply that effect throughout the Wanderer stage. It says, at the beginning of each game round, roll a blue sentience die. If the result is not a brain or sphere, choose a Wanderer to gain an envenomed card. If you haven't come across envenomed cards yet, then consider yourself lucky. They're about as much fun as a game of Twister with Emily's saw-wielding Malformation. As you can see, we're having to suffer the consequence of our loss against aggression, even though we're not even facing him in this game. If you thought that was bad, imagine what it would be like if we had all 4 tokens in that envelope. The small consolation is that Lineage envelopes will only torment you during the Wanderer stage. The finale stage doesn't use them. But let's keep going with our example. Suppose we play our second game, and despite all the challenges, we actually manage to defeat the Fury Abomination. At the end of the Wanderer stage, we'll flip his card, and we get to apply the rewards at the top. Firstly, if the Fury token were on top of the envelope, we'd be able to get rid of it. In other words, return it to the supply, rather than putting it back in the envelope. In this case, the Fury token isn't in play, so there's nothing to do. Sadly, the Aggression token goes back in the envelope, and it will continue to haunt us in future games. The only way to get rid of that is to defeat Aggression. The second reward for defeating Fury is that all Wanderers in the game will acquire 1 Legacy card, drawn at random from the Fury's Legacy deck. Each Abomination has their own deck of 12 Legacy cards. As mentioned, Legacy cards contain a variety of benefits, and they carry over from one game to the next. But there's an important limitation on Legacy cards. Each Wanderer can only possess 1 Legacy card from each deck. Conveniently, this is detailed here on the Abomination card. And that's it for Family Lineage. Okay, let's pretend that by some miracle we managed to defeat the Abomination, accumulate 40 story points, and now we're ready to set up the finale stage. Each storybook has 4 playable finales, called endings, A, B, C and D. You'll play whichever ending you gathered the most points for. In my example game, story point trackers C and D are tied for the most points, so I'll be playing ending C because it comes first alphabetically. Each of the 4 endings is also associated with a particular doorway symbol. It's very important to remember that if a component or effect displays one of these doorway symbols, then it can only be used if you're playing the corresponding ending. In my current game, I'm playing ending C, which has a very dark, slightly purple doorway symbol, which means that I can't enter encounters which display one of the other 3 doorways. Emily is the central Wanderer, and the table of contents tells me that ending C is on page 91. There will be some additional rules and setup instructions there, but first there are some setup instructions on page 29 of the rulebook. These are common to all finales, and we apply them first. Perhaps the most important tip I can give you is this: don't tear down the board at the end of the Wanderer stage. Unless you're instructed otherwise, you should leave various components where they are, including story point trackers, standees, and so on. Having said that, some components are guaranteed to change. For example, it's impossible to even reach the finale unless you've defeated the Abomination, which means that if you've gotten this far, you should have collected your rewards from the back of the Abomination's card, and then removed the Abomination and its various components from the board. That includes the Family Lineage envelope. We'll also get rid of the red and blue consequence tokens. Perhaps the biggest change when setting up the finale is that encounter cards used during the Wanderer stage are no longer applicable. We'll get rid of all those completed tokens, then return all encounter cards to their appropriate deck in alphabetical order. And we'll return the deck to the central Wanderer's box. In some cases they will be replaced by new encounter cards from the central Wanderer's box. These finale encounters can be recognized by the story tracker symbol in the bottom right corner. Okay, now we're ready to flip all the world shard cards to the reverse sides without removing any wanderers, monsters or other components. The reversed world shards have a couple of new encounters at the bottom. As already mentioned, we'll only be able to enter encounters marked with the dark purple doorway. Just like at the end of a round, you'll restore everyone's mental capacity, respawn any dead wanderers, and refresh any support cards. With all that done, I can turn to page 91 of the storybook and perform any special setup instructions, which I won't do here because spoilers. I will warn you that just because the Abomination has been defeated doesn't mean that you can kick back and relax. The finale will usually have you facing a final boss from the Central Wanderer's storage box. Your objectives, and any additional rules, will be laid out in the storybook. You'll continue to use most of the gameplay mechanics which we've been looking at throughout the series. In fact, unless you're told otherwise, you're free to continue using all the Wanderer actions listed in the quick reference, with the obvious exception of the confrontation action, which only applies to the abomination. Another point of difference is that if you're killed in the finale, you stay dead. Your Wanderer doesn't automatically respawn. Most of the other components we've looked at, like terrors and malformations, continue to work in the same way. One way or another, the finale will eventually end, and the storybook will give you some sort of conclusion. Some conclusions are better than others, but in the majority of cases you'll be told to unlock a new component called a Finale Legacy card. You'll find these inside the Central Wanderer's Forgotten envelope, which also contains a number of other locked and secret cards. Finale Legacy cards are a lot like Abomination Legacy cards, which we looked at earlier in this video. They grant Wanderers various boons or banes, and they carry over from one game to another. And that's a wrap on finales. Good luck surviving yours. And finally, before I wrap up this video, and the entire series of videos, let's take a quick look at the optional Devour Rules. These will make the abomination even more deadly than it already is, so it's up to you when, or if, you want to introduce these rules. The game developers don't recommend them until you've managed to reach the finale a few times, but for players with some experience, they do add an exciting and challenging twist to the game. The related components include a pile of Devour tokens and a whopping 126 Devour cards. The card backs are all the same, but for pity's sake don't just shuffle all these cards together, because they actually consist of multiple decks. Each abomination has their own deck of 12 cards, and there's also a bigger deck of 30 cards. These are called Otherworld cards, which just means that they're not specific to any particular abomination. Let's suppose we're starting a new game, and we've chosen the Aggression abomination. At the start of the game, we'll need to build a Devour deck by shuffling together all 12 of Aggression's cards with 12 random cards from the Otherworld deck. For the sake of clarity, let's take a peek at the front of a card. At the very top is the card's unique title, and beneath that is the abomination's name and family. And this is what an Otherworld card looks like. I'll shuffle these together, and of course at the end of the game I'll need to separate them again. This deck of 24 cards is placed beside the game board along with the Devour tokens. That's it for setup. For the gameplay, let's look at the 3 most important Devour rules which you need to remember. Firstly, every abomination card has an effect in the top left corner, telling you when and how to spawn Devour tokens onto the game board. In our example, the Aggression card says, each time Aggression loses health, spawn 1 Devour token on a random world shard. Other abominations may have different rules for spawning tokens. If you're new to the Devour rules, it can be easy to overlook this, so you might even consider putting some sort of reminder on the abomination card. Naturally, killing the abomination will prevent it from spawning new tokens, but unfortunately that won't remove tokens which have already been placed. In fact, once a Devour token has been placed on the board, it's horribly persistent, and it will even carry over into the finale stage. For now, let's assume the game has progressed some way, and I'll sprinkle a few Devour tokens on the board. The second rule is that Devour tokens will mess with all your sentience tests. Let's suppose that Emily is about to perform a confrontation test. Unfortunately, there are a couple of Devour tokens on the world shard she's on, so she must draw 2 cards from the Devour deck. For now, we can ignore the text on the cards, but every Devour card also displays at least 1 sentience colour, and we must roll 1 less die of those colours for this test. These are all the sentience dice she can normally roll, based on her current sentience attributes. But for this test, I'll have to roll 1 less blue and 1 less green. Of course, after the test, I'll discard the Devour cards. If the Devour deck ever runs out, just reshuffle the discards to form a new deck. The third important rule is that there are a couple of additional steps to take during the refresh phase at the end of each round, and neither of them are good news for the Wanderers. First of all, if your Wanderer ends the round on a world shard containing Devour tokens, they must draw a Devour card and resolve its text effect. For example, if you drew this card, then you'd gain the Envenomed condition. Of course, you'd ignore the green sentience icon, and you'd discard the Devour card when you're done. The second thing that happens during the refresh phase is that you must spawn even more Devour tokens onto the board if the abomination is still alive. Check the bottom left corner of the current confrontation card and spawn that many tokens, placing them at random. The good news is that you don't need to memorize these two steps, as they're included on the quick reference. And those are the three most important Devour rules. If further questions arise, don't forget the index on the back page of the rulebook. And that's a wrap for this video series. Thanks for joining me, and all the best with your own journeys into the other world.